In this video, I'll be running through the most commonly asked question that I get, which is, should I be running a Performance Max campaign or should I be running standard shopping? I'm going to start with a generalized statement and we'll work our way up to your specific scenarios so you know exactly whether you should be going down the standard shopping route or Performance Max. Because ultimately, it depends on a lot of factors. Factor number one, are you running a new account or an existing account? If you're running a new account, start with standard shopping, and there's two reasons why. Number one, you don't have enough conversion data within the account to be able to accurately model with a smart bidding strategy on a Performance Max campaign. Reason number two is because a standard shopping campaign is going to allocate 100% of your budget towards shopping, which is a better performing platform than search for every single e-commerce brand. If you were to launch on Performance Max instead, you would end up with about a 20 to 40% allocation towards search, which is going to be the underperforming platform. Now, what if you have a pre-existing account? Or let's say you started a new account and then it's been 2 months, you're now spending $5K a month. What should you do now? Question number one that you need to ask yourself: is Google our primary traffic channel, or do we get traffic from elsewhere? The reason why this question is so vital and important is because if you have a really large traffic channel that exists outside of Google, let's say you're currently spending $20,000, $30,000 a month on Meta, Google is going to heavily retarget, specifically Performance Max is going to heavily retarget all of the traffic that's going to the site from Facebook. And so you're going to end up with a lot of inefficient spend, overinflated spend towards simply placing on branded key terms across shopping, across search, as well as placing on retargeting across display, YouTube, as well as dynamic search ads on relevant key terms for users that have visited the site through Facebook. And so that ends up with a huge overinflation in spend on retargeting and a really large redirection of budget towards the bottom of funnel. And this is where you commonly run into the issue where people call Performance Max campaigns a very bottom of funnel retargeting based campaign. This isn't necessarily true if the Performance Max campaign is the only digital advertising campaign that you're running and it's your only source of traffic. Because who can it retarget? There's no one to retarget. There's no high intent audiences to go spend $8 on a click. It has to generate new traffic. It has to generate new customers. And that's where Performance Max ends up working quite well. And we have a case study of that on the channel. If you go back, I believe like 6 weeks ago, that it's called something like how we scaled a brand within 30 days by 50%. And it was simply by scaling up a Performance Max campaign. The only reason it worked was because they didn't have high budgets on any other channel that was driving traffic. So you can start to see now, just based on question one, the disadvantages that lie with Performance Max, and then also the advantages if you don't have other primary traffic channels. Question number two is, how long is our average data conversion from first click? The reason why you want to be asking this question is because Performance Max does a fantastic job at continually retargeting someone after they click on an initial search or an initial shopping ad. Do we need to be following up with someone aggressively for a 10 to 20 day period? For some brands, in fact, for a lot of brands, absolutely not. That is a huge waste of spend, and we're going to get a lot of inefficiency, and we're not going to get incrementality when we try to scale the campaign, because it will just put more budget into more retargeting. But for other brands, the answer is absolutely. With a furniture brand, for example, average data conversion might be 15 days. We want to be following up with everyone that visits the site consistently over that entire 15-day period, as it's very likely that an additional impression or two through retargeting is what's going to get a user over the line. And so far, you need to take into consideration your traffic channels and sources, and then your average data conversion from first click, or how long your customer journey is. Question number three is, do we prioritize control and transparency or performance within the overarching business? And this is where it really comes down to a business owner decision. And this is not something that I can give you the answer to. Let's go a little bit deeper on this as to what I actually mean. When you're running a standard shopping campaign, you have way more control and way more transparency as to what is actually going on. You can very easily identify, are we just scooping up brand search, or are we getting cold new conversions on cold key terms? If so, what key terms are converting? On top of that, are they in a pre-existing audience of website visitors? So you can get really good transparency as to, is this campaign actually driving new customer acquisition profitably, or is it not? And also, how scalable is it? And let's start scaling it up and see when we hit the roof. Comparatively, on Performance Max, you do not have that degree of control. You do not have that degree of transparency, but you might get slightly better performance. There's a few reasons why. Number one, you're going to have more robust targeting because it's all encapsulated within the one campaign, or at least that's what Google claims. Number two, and this is whether this is true or not, I'm not sure, but anytime a Google or Facebook rolls out a new feature, they will always prioritize that feature being used. And this makes complete sense within the context of the incentive structure of the platform, which is that if Facebook was to roll out a new feature, no one wants to use the feature because it hasn't been tested and proven to work. And so how then does the platform get you to use it? If no one wants to use a new feature because it's very unlikely to work, it has no testing, it doesn't look like a desirable feature to run, why would we do it? They can put a mechanism in place to where you get a bid adjustment, you get a discount at auction. And so when you run Advantage Plus on your creatives and we put terrible text over the top and we change your headlines and we can do whatever we want to it, we'll make it a little bit cheaper for you to actually place. And so your performance actually will be a little bit better. And so you'll continue using the feature. So we can continue gathering data on what works within the feature, and then we can continue to improve it until everyone uses it. And so that's the general rollout of a new feature across an ad platform. The same thing can be argued for Performance Max, which is that specifically in the early days of when Performance Max launched, there were huge gains in running Performance Max over standard shopping because you were just getting way better placements on really high intent audiences because Performance Max likely was just getting prioritized at auction. Over time, that arbitrage within the market has slowly deteriorated. However, in some instances, I have seen it where we've transitioned from a standard shopping to a Performance Max and we have genuinely seen better performance. However, it's really, really hard to measure that if you have different traffic channels and Google only plays a part in an overall paid media mix. It's also really hard to measure it if you have really long days to conversion because you have to wait for a very extended period of time before you can measure the statistical relevancy of whether the change from standard shopping to Performance Max has actually worked. And so when we say performance here, Performance Max from a direct ROI perspective can outperform standard shopping and does in a fair few instances. But the question is, it's very hard to measure the incremental lift here. Performance Max also doesn't scale very well because you don't get control over where the additional budget's going to go, and you don't get transparency over the actual incremental returns available within the campaign type. And that's probably where I'll leave this video, which is on the topic of incremental return on ad spend. We have a video on this on the channel as well. If you were to look at a Facebook account and you had campaigns running on 7-day click, your base assumption is that when you look at a cold targeting campaign and you see a full return on ad spend, you will make an assumption that if we put an additional $1,000 in spend into that campaign or into that ad set, that we will get about a 4x incremental return on that additional $1,000 in spend. Now, someone with a little bit more intuition will likely make the claim that there's going to be an erosion in efficiency on each incremental budget lift. And so let's say that instead of a 4, maybe we get a 3.8 or we get a 3.6. And you can be confident in that decision-making and therefore financially plan, inventory plan accordingly, and then execute on that budget increase. Now, the issue is, as a lot of people probably know, that isn't the reality of these platforms. When you see an attributed return on ad spend in platform and then you go and add more budget, sometimes you get no incremental revenue. And some people then go and extrapolate that idea and say that you can't trust any ROAS on any platform ever. But that's not true because it lacks the understanding of how attribution models are affecting that assumption, which is that if you're looking at 7-day click on Facebook and the pixel set up correctly, is tracking correctly, you can pretty much shave 10 to 20% off that ROAS and assume that that's going to be the incremental lift when we put more spend. As long as there's continued creative diversity entering the account, there's continued improvements across how many unique ads are currently active, it's a very fair assumption that you can bake into your models. However, if you try to do that on Performance Max, it almost never translates. And in fact, what we've ended up seeing, and I've seen other data in the industry that supports this, which is that if you look at the actual ROAS on a Performance Max campaign, let's say it's a 10, you'll generally only get about 30 to 50% of the incremental returns on whatever that static return currently is. And so if you have a 10 ROAS on your Performance Max campaign and you want to go put more budget into it, you might make the reasonable assumption that you're probably going to get an 8, maybe a 9 incremental lift on that additional spend. That's not going to be the case. You're probably going to get an incremental 3 to 5. And so you have a lot better control and transparency when it's a standard shopping campaign, because you see a 10 on a standard shopping campaign. When you layer in more spend, it's probably going to erode to about an 8 or a 9 incrementally, but still that's quite good. But with the Performance Max, you have no idea what that incremental return is going to be. And so when you look at actually scaling an account up, if there's additional search volume, if you exist within a niche where there's a lot of volume that could be captured on Google as a platform, you have to weigh up. Do we want control and transparency as we try to scale this thing? Or do we want slightly better performance, 10 to 20% at the current spend? But then when we try to scale, we completely lack any transparency. We don't know what's going on, and we actually don't know whether performance is better or not. And so that's ultimately the third question that you have to weigh up. And there's no right answer here. We have clients that prefer performance. We have clients that prefer control and transparency. Now, if I was going to run my own brand, I would probably sit here. But I also completely understand why people would want to sit here, because at the end of the day, this is going to produce more contribution dollars in the short term. In the medium to long term, different story. But in the short term, this is going to put more dollars into your net profit.